Revolution. My name is Trevor Young, and with me is my fortnightly partner in crime, Brendan Keogh. How are you?
Viewers, listeners, very well, thanks, Trev.
So this is a live stream on Twitter and LinkedIn, but it will also be used as a podcast episode for the Reputation Revolution. And so we're multi-streaming, multimedia, we're multi-everything here, Brendan.
Super multi.
A super multi. Now, what we do in these fortnightly episodes is that we recap the previous or the current episode that's on the show, and then we go deeper, and who knows where the conversation can take us. The current episode that we're recapping is all about how to leverage a podcast guest, how to leverage podcast guest appearances to build your professional personal brand. So I interviewed Shelby Janner from Zilker Media. She's the Chief Publicity Director there, and she and her team get a lot of experts and thought leaders and authors onto other people's podcasts. And it's a thing you can do strategically. It can be a very, very powerful way to build your visibility for your personal brand and grow your influence as well. And so the title of that one was really called Going Small to Make It Big with Earned Media. And so while we did look at other things like, whether it's YouTube shows or blog, going on other people's blogs and guest posting and that side of things, it was very focused around podcast guest interviews. Brendan, what was your overarching insights from it? What your key takeaways from that interview?
Key takeaway, Trev, was how good are podcasts? Aren't they just the best?
We love them. Very meta.
Look, there were so many great reminders of why podcasts are valuable, critical part of your arsenal, your marketing arsenal. But I think, the most benefit I got from it, and just I've a couple of coaching clients I've forwarded them this podcast. They were thinking of, and I'm encouraging them to get on people's podcasts. I forwarded them this episode. Just listen to this, right? So it's the practical approach to getting on the podcast. So the strategic approach, it is something, again, recurring theme, having a bit of a strategy of what you're trying to get out of it. And if you come to getting on people's podcasts with a strategic approach, I love you talk about 6 pitches per year. You only got quality, not quantity. Of in terms of reaching out to be a guest on key strategic people's podcasts, and a part of that strategic approach is taking the time to do your research. Actually listen to multiple episodes, get to know the host. So a lot of background to work out. To ensure firstly that this podcast matches your audience and their goals, and your message, and that you can bring something to the table, whether it's reinforcing common themes that are there or bringing something brand new, a new different perspective, always with that lens of how can I help the audience, the host's audience, get more value.
Yeah, that's a key point, and I think there was some sort of nuances around that in the conversation, and we talked at it at a quite a tactical level, but then Shelby and I got into the nuances of it, and there's a lot. Once you get your head around that, it's pretty straightforward. But it's not like pitching out, just putting out a press release to people, or it's not even like pitching a radio station, for example. Or a journalist. It's because a phrase that I used and Shelby liked it, and I used it a couple of times, was that these are passion projects, often podcasts. Now, we're not talking the top tier podcasts necessarily. We're talking more about ones like this where the audiences can be small and niche, and some of these podcasts can get quite big as well. So it's something that we've got to understand that the person who's doing the interviewing is probably the producer, and they know their audience and they love what they do and they know what they're trying to, the value they're trying to deliver. And so it's a matter of understanding that and being in sync. A lot of people, when they pitch, they almost say, I want to be on your show sort of thing. It's almost a demand, but it shouldn't be like that whatsoever.
Just little. So it was I was filled with practical tips like that, and things like ask, just as you said, don't just state what you want. Ask if are you looking for guests? Just common courtesy approach. But it's not about you. Okay, every content producer is looking for content. So every podcast host is looking for great guests. So it's a good. There is they're open to an approach. Just that as long as it's considered, you've shown that you've listened and understood what the podcast is about. With that long game approach you spoke about with Shelby, it's connect with the host on LinkedIn, all the other platforms, engage with their content, share their stuff, so that when you do approach them, it's not out of the blue, and that they are at least aware of you. So, that's a simple, smart thing. But again, it's doing the work. It's that longer game.
It depends too if you're going to scale it and you want to do more, or you want to just be very cherry pick the ones that really hit your market. And the thing is, you might operate in a country and you don't want to go outside of that country too much. So, if it were in Australia, there's X amount of Australian podcasts, but you open up the borders, the international borders, and there's thousands and thousands. So, there's a little bit of what your goals are and who you're trying to reach, and then you've got to see, well, how can they align with the podcasts that we approach. And I will say that there was Zilker Media, so that's where Shelby works. Previously on the podcast, I've interviewed Tom Schwab from Interview Valet. They do a very similar thing. They're just a podcast interview guest agency. That's all they do. There's another one called, I think it was called Interview Connections, which Oscar Trimboli uses. He was another recent guest here on the Reputation Revolution podcast, and he does 2 every month consistently. And so he's racking them up, and he's done, I think, my memory serves me, Brendan, he did he's done it for about 5 years. He's got hundreds of them, really.
But he was strategic too, wasn't he? He's not mucking around just doing anything.
He's got someone to help doing it. So this is something this is DIY. And if you're going to do DIY, you need to do a little bit of a homework. Otherwise, you can pay someone to do the work for you, and it's done for you, and you turn up and do the best job possible at those interviews, and then on it rolls. Brendan, there's a couple of things that I thought that people should be really aware of when going down this path. And number one is to be prepared to have what can you bring as a thought leader, as a professional expert? What can you bring to the table with your topic that no one else has really done before? So you've got to go back and have a listen and have a look at see what these podcasts have covered in the past. But what's your point of view? What can you bring to the table that's a little bit different and not the same?
Absolutely. And I think, there has to be some through line, some connection to what the themes that do recur. You don't want something totally different to the opposite approach. But yes, what's the fresh idea or something, a new angle, something that hasn't been done to death on their podcast. So every host would be looking for that kind of fresh blood, something new take. You guys spoke about, so of course you're going to have, as you're doing your DIY, or if you're more getting help, it's obviously helpful to have a bio, that media bio.
Yep.
One thing I kind of noted, that's kind of the base level. It's the other connections that you make are really what drive it. So, but that bio can have your key talking points, things you often talk about, but it needs to be broad enough that you can adapt it to modern, newsworthy topics. So what's come up recently that you can sort of have an input into based around those core tenets that you speak on, that you always refer to. So being flexible in that sense of how can you adapt to what's newsworthy, but ultimately it's around thinking about the host's audience. What do they want? And so that's when you can really. I speak about this, but I know your audience is in this industry and they've got this issue. So I think we could really bring in the this angle. And as you guys spoke about, with the smaller podcast where it might be the host being the producer, they're often really because it is so close to their heart. They want it to succeed. They'll work with you to craft the right angle, the right message, and something that's going to be of interest to the audience, which should be your primary driver. That came through loud and clear. Don't focus on yourself. It's not about you with the pitch and shouting about can I be on your podcast? Don't pitch them off. I think was this is the T-shirt of this episode. But yeah, get to know them. But think about their audience. That's really the key driver of crafting, being a really good guest.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think the one pager or the two pager, depending on the size type that you use, the font size. But
the picture.
Ones that, I get pitched, and I can talk about lessons in that from being on the other side of it as well. But the best ones have got some suggested talking points that around the broad theme. So if there's a number of broad themes that's what you cover, and they're in kind of lockstep with who you're pitching to as well. And then there's the talking points within those broader themes. And I think that, sometimes when I get pitched that, I look at that and I say, look, there's one here that I really want to draw out, and I think that we can have a half-hour conversation around this one talking point topic. But sometimes there's a multiple of them that they kind of all roll in together, and that's not a bad thing as well, because it shows that there's going to be a robust conversation as well. So it really is, again, to help the podcast host with some material through guidance versus telling them what to do, and that's the same if you're going to pitching a story to a journalist. You come in with the suggestion, this is the idea that I'm thinking, what do you think of this? And that's usually the basis of if you're kind of on spec, it might be taken further.
So while we're on it, can you give some examples, the turn-ons and turn-offs of people pitching you right from the start, like from whether they, have you noticed people connect with you and engage and then pitch, or are they more just...
No, not necessarily. No, that doesn't often happen. Usually it's a cold
Isn't
pitch.
that easy? It's fairly easy to connect with someone. I know the engaging with content is a bit more time consuming.
Yeah, and I think that if that's when you're doing it directly, most of the pitches I get now, most would be through agencies, or representatives or VAs or something like that.
Yep.
I think, and you can tell the difference pretty quickly who a good one is and who's not. And a lot of the ones that I get now are just entrepreneurs trying to, and it's a fair thing. They're an entrepreneur who's got a good story, and they've done this, and this, and I don't really cover that unless they've built a personal brand-based business. But often it's an e-commerce store. They've growth hacked their way or whatever, and you only have to listen to any of my podcasts to know that's not the space that I sort of play in, and a lot of the stories. Look, there's a lot of stories. It's that cliche that they started with nothing and now they've built it up to a multi-million-dollar business and stuff. And look, there are podcasts that cover that and that they eat that stuff up, but it's not what I do. So I do get a lot of that, and that to me is a pretty good indicator that they probably haven't really done their homework. But when the one with Shelby, for example, that was pitched to me, and the person that pitched me was an incredibly really sharp, smart, really good intro letter, because it's cold. Let's face it, it's cold until you build up rapport, and then they can pitch other guests to you over the journey. That's the ideal. And that's why the good agencies are really good, because they build relationships with the hosts. But their pitch to me was very good, and they'd done their homework, and it was spot on. So I went with it. So I'd reckon out of 20 pitches, I might take one. 30 pitches, I might take one or two. And and so when they're right, you just know. And I guess that's as a podcast host, and we've got 240 plus episodes of the show, I kind of know what I want now. And so I'm willing to work with someone to make it happen. And sometimes it comes in and it's kind of, a pitch will come in and it's kind of there, but it's kind of not. And I'll say, look, if you want to go down this path, I'm happy to. Let's try that. And usually people are accommodating. So the other part of it is if you've got a book coming out and you're wanting to promote the book, and Shelby and I did talk about, authors and books and stuff like that. A book is really good because it kind of gives you that more topicality, and you can do it in advance if you know it's coming. You can send a book to the podcaster as well, or an audio book, or a PDF, and that side of things is really good because a book show that you've probably put the effort, you have put the effort in, and there's a bit of depth of thinking. It's a bit of a shortcut, a heuristic to that, and it builds that trust a little bit, that credibility a little bit more quickly. But you've also got to be aware that, and Shelby and I talked about this, is sometimes podcasts are so well in advance, it's quite long lead media. Not all the time. Everyone's on different timetables, but some podcasters, gosh, I've done some and it took 4 or 5 months to come up. And so you need to be aware that if you're going to launch a book on a particular date, to get into someone's diary quite soon, if they are more of a long lead producer of podcasts. And some of them batch produce and they just do it all on one day, and you're going to have to be ready for that day. If and the bigger the podcasts, they can afford to do that, because people will acquiesce to that demand, and be prepared to wait. So you've got to, again, this comes down to the planning, doesn't it? Being strategic about it.
Absolutely, and the the type of podcast you're looking to get onto. So smaller ones are a bit more nimble. You're dealing with the host. You probably you're more consultative in the approach and what we're going to talk about. Bigger ones often have longer lead times. Again, back to the Oscar Trimboli interview where he talked about he only deals with people who have the agents because they're at a certain level, and he goes, he knows that they're going to be at a certain quality. So in terms of interview agencies, and that's the same with books. Sometimes people could perceive that as rightly as you just enunciated, you're thinking together. You've articulated your thoughts. You've got something to say. So that, in theory, is yes. In theory, you're going to be a more effective guest. You're going to, you've gathered all your stories and all of that. So I do like that approach. But it brings me to the other really interesting part of your conversation I found. Niching, and the size of the podcast. Shelby talked about telling a lot of our clients not to get hung up on the distribution, the reach of the podcast, because if it's got a niche that's just filled with your ideal target customers or your target audience, that's gold, absolute gold. So it doesn't have to have a massive Forbes mass media distribution. Often that's where you get the generalist reader, and in that is a very small, minute part that's actually your audience. Where if you can find the right small but niche, spot on niche podcast, that can be infinitely more valuable. So that was a really interesting approach, and realization that small, niche is good. Yeah,
and the other thing is, it's a great way to meet influencers. If a podcaster's got a platform, and chances are if they're on a podcast, they're probably active on social, they got an audience, and who knows what the size of it is, but hopefully it's an audience, hopefully it's engaged. And the fact of the matter is, by going onto their podcast, you're actually building a relationship with an influencer. So it is a de facto influencer marketing or an influencer relations play.
Well, and of course they, what was the term? You're sharing a value.
Value exchange we use.
Value exchange. Thank you. And that, each, the guest and host share that other person, so you just instantly get exposure to that much broader network. So, magnificent. The other part was the socials. So I think just a quick reference, that ability to have little snippets of that episode shared on socials is how you really amplify things, because not everyone's got the time to listen to full episodes, but just to have in their periphery that you're out there doing this stuff, you're either being interviewed or you've got great guests on your podcast, and you can get a snippet of and get a feel for what you're talking about and the kind of things that you're an expert in. It's so powerful, and that's super shareable, all of those things. So they're just really important components of the whole podcast approach.
Yeah. So, and that means when the guest is doing that, not the guest, when the podcast themselves, and a lot of them are doing that now, they do cut the snippet. Some often now, like this one, we're doing this one live, but I record in video as well, and then take those video snippets and put them across the socials. But, I think the best part of being a guest is that you can then legitimately, and it's fantastic because it helps the podcaster as well. Again, the podcaster is trying to build their podcast. They want subscribers. They want to increase the reach of their platform. And so by having guests who are actually got their own platform and are active in sharing, that is gold. And that's something that I look at. If there's a guest that says, I've got all these great, and they make a good interview guest, but they've also got they're quite active on social media, and they've got a good following across various platforms, and they're willing to share and to help promote that episode, then that's another tick as far as I'm concerned.
Would it help if they you really articulated, this is what I'd like to do post once the episode's released? I'd like to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I'd never really interview someone if they're just going to promote it, because that defeats the purpose. But if the interview looked right and they had the bona fides and all of that sort of stuff there, tick, tick, tick. If they'd been on other people's podcasts before, that's always a tick. But it's not, it's not a deal breaker. But most times they probably have. So they're at least they're articulate and can talk. And but if they then add a third layer in and say, look, I'm really happy to promote this as well. I've got 5,000 followers on on Twitter, and I've got 10,000 on LinkedIn, and please, if you do snippets and that, I'm happy to share them as well. And to my mind, that's gold. That's good. That's a bonus. That shows that value exchange is top of mind for them. And it's in their best interest to do it too, of course. The whole thing about earned media is what you do after it, through your own means, as much as what the media outlet itself does. And a podcast is a media outlet. So yes, I think that's good. And again, it's a win-win. We want to win. We want to win for the audience, of course. We want to win for the podcaster. And if we can add value to their audience and do all that and make life easy for them, that's fantastic. If we can then help promote them, that's even better. And if we can, get something out of it ourselves and get some more content out there, that's a win for us. So it's fantastic.
And again, on the value exchange, an opportunity to show direct the audience to where you want them, where you want their eyeballs post interview. Yep. And Shelby talked about a lead magnet. I think it's a really good thing. What can you offer and direct people to as a kind of call to action to close out the interview? Super powerful. So that's I guess as you build up your chocks in your interviews and get on a few podcasts, really get your talking points, and you get onto bigger ones, it's you want to make the most, maximize that opportunity. But that's having a really powerful lead strategic.
That's being strategic, isn't it? So with Shelby, they've got a service called Podcast Guest Insider, and it's they share with you. It's a subscription thing, but they give you a free month was the key takeaway, and it's a podcast database where they are up to date with people who are doing podcasts, and you can subscribe to that if you want to do it yourself. So, that's a value add, and it gives it's action that the audience can take if they're interested in the topic. And of course, they wouldn't be listening if they weren't interested. So, and if you've got a a report or an ebook or a checklist or more videos or something that you can direct people to as well, then that's a bonus as well. And I think as a podcaster, you're happy to share that, because if people have sat through the interview, they're interested in the topic, and if there's some more value at the end, all good from my end.
How good are podcasts?
Oh, fantastic. Now, mate, just before we wrap up, I just want to, the same thinking applies. Being on other people's, as a guest on other people's podcasts, it's a bit of a mouthful, all that, isn't it? Is really like the old guest, the new guest blogging. And guest blogging is still a thing, but in the earlier days of blogging, which was bigger before podcasting, that you'd go to someone, same deal. Do you want me to write a guest post on your blog? And you don't see as much of that around now, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But that's the same thing. It's like an opinion piece in a trade journal or something like that. But I'm giving you a story of value. I think it's right for your readers. As the publisher or as the blogger, you're thinking, well, this is great. I get an extra thing. It's really good. It makes sense. It's good for my audience. It's respectful. It adds value. All the things. And there's some people out there that have, some thought leaders and that who have built quite big platforms, out of either doing podcast interviews or prior to that, they're doing the guest blogging thing. And again, it's the same deal.
Same deal, same process. So it just got me thinking, has anyone ever written a guest blog based on your interview with them, and so they can weave in your story as well? And
look, I don't know, not off the top of my head, but I sometimes when I do a podcast, I'm being interviewed, or it's someone's live stream like this, and it becomes their podcast as well, which we know live streams and podcasts and video now, they're all rolled in, and then it ends up on YouTube. Well, then I will take that YouTube clip or interview and put it on my blog. So why not? It's great for all parties as well. And I'll write a spiel of what we covered about it. And sometimes I'll put a transcript in if I recall. I've done that in the past as well. So that's good for me. I get a good blog post out of it. I get to put my interview where I've, had some ideas and hopefully some insights. And that fits with my blog. They love it because it's extra promotion of them, links back to them. All good, that's another win-win. So thank you for bringing that up.
Repurpose,
that's good as well. And the other thing is, it's whether it's a podcast, whether it's a YouTube show or a live stream. So there's some people out there who are just doing live streams and they want guests for their live streams. This is the same deal. Or they're doing a YouTube show first, and whether or not it becomes a podcast, that's up in the air sometimes. But the same thinking is applying. These are micro media outlets. They serve a really good purpose. They've got good engaged audiences, and they should be on the radar of anyone out there who wants to build a professional personal brand and grow their thought leadership positioning in the marketplace. Absolutely. Now, we've used the word earned media, haven't we, in this? And just for people, because that's a PR term, but earned media is really all that media that you exposure or coverage, editorial exposure or coverage that you get because you've earned the right to do it, whether you've pitched and done the grunt work to do it, or you've built your brand enough that people come to you and podcasters come to you. You've earned the right for that to happen.
Yeah, I was just going to add in on talking guest blogging, because you've talked a lot about how powerful newsletters are and they're having a real renaissance. So people are crying out for content again. So, obviously the podcast component, but something written in the written form is super powerful. It doesn't have to be related, but it's a big area to be positioning yourself to be on, strategic newsletters.
Yeah. And that's if they do interviews or however they do it. They might do case studies or interviews or something like that. If they, that's the thing. I mean, if it's just a straight newsletter that they riff a story, probably not. But it's which brings us to the podcasting and knowing who you're pitching to. You'd be surprised, as Shelby said, do not pitch to someone who doesn't do interviews. And there are a lot of podcasters who riff. They riff. They don't talk to anyone. There's no interview. Do not.
Or it's defunct, as she said a lot.
Yeah, they haven't put anything out. They haven't put anything out for years. That's just lack of homework, and that's lazy. That's
yeah. Well, but yeah, obviously you're just going through a list somewhere that you've gathered. You haven't even gone to check it out, see when, just have even a listen to the last one. So
yeah, no, that's not the thing. So in wrapping up, being a podcast. Sorry, this is getting messy, mate. Becoming
other people's OPP.
Other people's podcasts. Yes, becoming a guest on other people's podcasts, doing it strategically, doing it long term, doing it on a consistent basis. It's a thing. I think a good thing to build your brand and your influence and grow your network and all the things, all the good stuff. It takes time to do it. You can either DIY and that side of things, or you can farm it out to someone and pay for them to do it. If you're going to get a VA to do it who's not really experienced in it, I'd be having a very big hand on that, and making sure that that's right, and almost, be doing everything but the actual pitch, but making sure everything's buttoned down on that front. But if it's with a reputable agency, they'll work with you. They'll work with you to find your voice and your angles and your topics, and they'll work with you on all numbers of fronts and also what equipment you need and all that. So that's a good thing. But if you're a bit more experienced and you're happy to go solo and do a DIY, that's all good as well. Just do your homework. You've got to have your radar on. You've got to be listening to a lot of podcasts, and your audience. Ask the people who you want who is in your audience on your social channels and that. What do they listen to? What are their favorite podcasts? And then start a list and keep adding to that list, and then work your way through it. And it can be a grind, but at the end of the day, if you can get into the groove of it and it's part of your day-to-day earned media outreach, then so be it. It's worth it.
My final point, but you touched on it just then. If you're starting out being a guest, you're unsure what's the right podcast to be on. Ask your network. Ask your existing ideal audience. What are they listening to? What podcasts are they like? That's a really good starting point.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to reach out and email them, or hit them up on Twitter or whatever their favourite mode of communication. Usually podcasters are out and about, and they're very accessible and approachable. And I'm talking, the medium level ones. I mean, you get the top ones that are like media companies on their own. That's a different ball game because they've got production teams. But in terms of the passion project, and let's not forget, there's a couple of other type of podcasts as well that I just want to touch on. This is a long show, I'm sorry, but there's a lot to chat about, BK.
It's juicy.
One is that if there's an industry trade journal, for example, they don't just have an online publication now. Very rarely they'll have a hard copy. But they often now will have podcasts and YouTube interviews. Your industry trade journal, that's a good thing. That's worth looking at. And the other ones are brands. And they might have a team of one or two people looking after it, but it's on behalf of the brand. That's a good thing as well, because they run off the smell of an oily rag, and they haven't got masses of resources. So again, if you can deliver value, that's a good way to do it. So there's the passion project. Marketing efforts, and then there's the ones that are part of a they're everywhere. Every orifice out there, digital orifice.
Well, okay, the mind boggles there, but the hamster's falling off the wheel a little bit in terms of the connection. So, but what I took from that is, again, the niche, the power of niching. Don't be seduced by a big distribution reach. Just think about the audience and who's your audience and who is this. Who can you really influence and ultimately get that outcome that you your strategy that you have in mind from doing this in the first place.
Indeed, mate. We're going to pull up stumps there. So thank you very much for your time. We've been talking about going small to make it big with earned media, but specifically becoming a guest on other people's podcasts. We'll finish up there, Brendan, and talk to you in a fortnight's time.
Don't pitch me off.
Don't pitch me off. That's the T-shirt. That's the T-shirt. Cheers.
See you guys.